We often think that the world's deepest mysteries lie beneath the golden sands of Egypt or among the shattered temples of Mesopotamia. But what if the most astonishing enigmas, those that modern science still cannot explain, are quietly buried beneath the ancient soil of China? A pyramid taller than Giza, yet erased from every official map. Caves carved into solid rock with no trace of tools or builders. Stone discs etched with a language unknown to humanity, said to tell a story from the stars. Skeletons that defy human proportions, and ancient diagrams that map the laws of the cosmos without math, metal, or machines. These aren't stories of fantasy. They are real places, real objects, real puzzles, and yet, no one dares to touch them. No one is allowed to look inside. And the more we ignore them, the louder they whisper. What knowledge has been buried, deliberately or by time? What if the history we teach is only the part we were allowed to know? Today, we journey into the heart of ancient China, to explore the unsolved, to question the forbidden, and to ask what truths still lie sealed beneath the earth, waiting to awaken. So fasten your seatbelt, because this time the mystery doesn't come from legends. It rises from the ground itself. In the spring of 1945, an American pilot named James Gaussman was flying a supply route between India and China. As his aircraft crossed the Shaanxi province, he spotted something utterly unexpected. A colossal pyramid rising from the earth, standing alone in the vast fields, its shape too symmetrical to be natural. He claimed to have taken photographs and written detailed notes, but when he reported the sighting, his account was quietly shelved. Some dismissed it as a mirage, others called it a mistake, but the image never left him. 2 years later, in 1947, another pilot, Morris Sheehan of the United States Air Force, was flying a similar route. He too reported seeing a pyramid, this time with a flat top like a giant had sliced it horizontally. His story reached the New York Times. For a brief moment, the world turned its attention to the idea that perhaps China, too, held ancient secrets buried in plain sight. But just as quickly, the Chinese government responded with a firm denial. There are no pyramids in China, they said. And once again, the silence returned. But silence cannot erase geometry, and nature does not make perfect triangles. It wasn't until the 1990s that truth pierced through denial. With the rise of satellite technology, especially tools like Google Earth, archaeologists and independent researchers began to see what had been hidden for decades. Across the lands surrounding the ancient city of Xi'an, once the capital of over a dozen Chinese dynasties, dozens of pyramid-shaped mounds emerged from the satellite imagery. Some were subtle, covered in trees and grass, blending seamlessly into the rolling landscape. But from above, their symmetry was unmistakable. These were not hills. They were structures, deliberately built and deliberately concealed. One of the largest is the tomb of Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty. It stands nearly 50 meters tall with a base area that surpasses the Great Pyramid of Giza. But unlike the stone blocks of Egypt, these Chinese pyramids were constructed using rammed earth, layered and compressed into dense structures, and then covered in vegetation. This method wasn't just practical, it was strategic. It made the pyramids look like hills, invisible, protected, and forgotten. This raises a question few dare to ask. Why hide them? Many scholars believe the concealment was meant to deter tomb robbers, and yet others suspect something deeper, that these monuments weren't meant to be admired or studied. They were meant to be left alone, undisturbed, feared. Even today, Chinese policy forbids excavation of many of these sites, not because they are dangerous to archaeologists, but because officials claim our technology is not yet advanced enough to preserve what lies within. Until we can promise absolute preservation, the tombs must remain sealed. And so they wait. Among them is the most infamous of all, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Outside, his terracotta army stands in silent formation. But the tomb itself, the central burial chamber, has never been opened. According to ancient texts, it contains rivers of flowing mercury, miniature palaces, precious stones embedded in the ceiling to represent the stars, and mechanical traps designed to kill intruders. For centuries, this was believed to be myth. But in 2005, a geological survey revealed extraordinarily high levels of mercury in the soil above the tomb, exactly where the ancient text said the rivers flowed. Suddenly, legend and science began to blur. If the mercury was real, what else might be? Some archaeologists have called for excavation. Others warn against it, because beyond the preservation concerns lies a deeper fear. That what we find might not fit the timeline of history. That what we uncover might change the way we understand civilization itself. And so, the pyramids remain silent, mapped but untouched, seen but unexplored. They rise like quiet warnings from a past we pretend to know. But perhaps the greatest mystery is not what lies beneath them. It is why, in a world obsessed with uncovering everything, we still haven't dared to look inside. Beneath the hills outside Xi'an lies a sealed chamber that has haunted archaeologists for over half a century. It is not hidden. It is not lost. It is clearly marked, protected, studied from afar. And yet, no one has ever entered, because no one dares to. This is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, the man who built the Great Wall, the man who drank mercury in his search for immortality, and the man whose final resting place is believed to house the most dangerous archaeological site on Earth. When the tomb was discovered in 1974, it was already guarded by an army, not of soldiers, but of clay. Life-sized terracotta warriors, each with a unique face and posture, arranged in precise military formation. Over 8,000 of them, standing in silence, facing east, waiting. But these warriors are not the tomb. They are the outer ring, the first line of defense. The inner chamber, the core of the emperor's burial site, remains sealed beneath a massive mound of earth, untouched since 210 BCE, not due to neglect, but by deliberate choice. Why? Ancient texts describe the inside of the tomb with breathtaking detail. They speak of palaces and towers, miniature cities crafted in bronze and jade. They speak of stars embedded in the ceiling, and of rivers and seas made of flowing mercury, set in motion by ancient machines. And most chilling of all, they speak of traps, deadly mechanisms designed to pierce, poison, or crush any who enter without permission. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as legend. But modern science tells a different story. In 2005, researchers from the China University of Geosciences conducted soil analysis around the tomb. They found extraordinarily high levels of mercury in the area, far beyond anything found naturally. Exactly where the ancient text said the toxic rivers would flow. If the mercury is real, what else is? But even more than poison or traps, there is a fear that runs deeper. A fear not of danger, but of disruption. Because if the tomb is opened and what lies inside does not match our timeline, then history itself will have to change. Our understanding of ancient China, of science, of technology, even of humanity's place in the story. So the tomb remains sealed, not by stone, but by choice. Some say it is a matter of respect. Others say it is scientific caution. But perhaps it is something else. Perhaps there are truths within that we are not yet ready to face. Or perhaps deep down we understand that some doors should not be opened, not because of what's behind them, but because of what they might reveal about us. Each year, rain seeps into the earth above the tomb. Roots dig deeper. The soil shifts, the structure decays, and the past slips slowly out of reach. Preservation through inaction is no preservation at all. It is surrender. And yet the ban remains. No excavation, no entry, no answers. We stand at the threshold of one of the greatest discoveries in human history. But we do not cross it, maybe out of reverence, maybe out of fear, or maybe, just maybe, because the silence says more than the bones ever could. In the summer of 1992, in a small village called Xianbeikan in Zhejiang Province, China, a farmer decided to drain a pond. The pond had always been there. Locals believed it was natural. Still, he was curious. Why was the water so deep? Why did it never dry out even in the heat of summer? He rented a pump. He let it run for hours. Then something strange happened. As the water receded, it didn't reveal mud or fish or reeds. It revealed stone. Flat, smooth stone, walls, corners, a doorway. What the farmer had uncovered was not a pond at all. It was the roof of a massive underground chamber, and it was only the beginning. Over the next few months, archaeologists arrived, and what they found would soon become one of the most unexplainable discoveries in modern archaeology. A network of 24 enormous caves, all carved directly into solid sandstone. No supporting beams, no signs of collapse. Each chamber towering up to 30 meters high, stretching deep beneath the earth. And not a single mention of them in any ancient record. That's what makes Longyou different, not just its scale, but its silence. China is a civilization known for meticulous record-keeping. From the Shang dynasty onward, every major construction project was documented. Temples, walls, tombs, even irrigation ditches. But for the Longyou caves, nothing. No scroll, no tablet, no oral legend. They simply exist. And that's not the only mystery. Inside the caves, the walls are etched with parallel lines. Thousands of uniform striations carved into the stone from floor to ceiling, perfectly spaced, so consistent they appear machine-cut. But the caves were supposedly made thousands of years ago. long before drills, long before electricity, long before the concept of machinery itself. What tool could have made those lines? And more importantly, why? There is no debris, no piles of chipped stone, no broken tools, no soot from torches, no ash from fires, and no signs of human habitation. No bones, no pottery, no altars, no symbols. It's as if the caves were never meant to be lived in, never meant to be seen. They were carved to exist, to be, and then to be forgotten. Some suggest the caves were ancient quarries, but quarries are chaotic, uneven, practical. Longyou is the opposite, symmetrical, geometric, aesthetic. Others suggest military storage, perhaps from the Warring States period. But no weapons were found, no inscriptions, no strategic layout, and again, no records. There are even theories that the caves were temples or ritual spaces, but there is no evidence of worship, no deities, no carvings, no incense burns, nothing. Then there's the engineering question. The caves are carved into sandstone, a soft, fragile material. Yet, after thousands of years submerged in groundwater, the structures remain intact. No significant erosion, no roof collapse, no internal failure. Modern engineers have studied the site. Some admit that even with today's technology, building such a system without reinforcement would be difficult. The caves have no central support columns, yet the ceilings hold perfectly. How did they calculate structural load? How did they carve with such precision? How did they remove an estimated 1 million cubic meters of stone without leaving a trace? One theory suggests a massive workforce operating over decades. But if that were true, where are the records? Where are the worker camps? Where are the tools? In 2012, researchers from the University of Tokyo examined algae and mineral buildup on the ceilings. Their estimate, the caves had been underwater for over 1,000 years, and yet the carvings are still sharp, the grooves are still defined, the geometry is still exact. How? What kind of knowledge did the builders possess? What kind of purpose could have driven them to create something so vast, so hidden, and so utterly silent? Perhaps they wanted to leave something behind, not to be used, not to be worshipped, but simply to be found, to spark a question, to remind us of what we still don't know. Because Longyou is not just an archaeological mystery, it is a philosophical one. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we might not be the first advanced society to walk this earth, or that our definition of advanced is far more limited than we think. The caves are still there, cold, empty, and waiting. And perhaps the silence inside them isn't the absence of answers, but the echo of a question we've yet to understand. High in the remote Bayan-Har Mountains, near the border of Tibet and China, there lies a cave that no one can prove exists. And yet, its story has traveled across continents. It has been whispered in museums, published in UFO journals, spoken in the same breath as ancient astronauts, because of what was said to be found inside. Hundreds of strange stone discs, carved with spirals, etched with characters too small to read with the naked eye. A discovery so extraordinary, it vanished. The year was 1938. An archaeological team led by a man named Kai Pu-te was conducting an expedition in the Bayan Karyula mountain range. They entered a system of caves, and what they found stunned them. 716 stone discs, each about 30 centimeters in diameter, with a perfect hole in the center, like ancient records pressed in stone. But what made them truly unique were the spiral grooves carved along the surface. Grooves filled with tiny symbols, not Chinese, not Tibetan, not any language known to scholars. For decades, the discs were stored away, untranslated, unexplained. Then in 1962, a man named Sum Nui claimed he had cracked the code. He said he was a linguist, and he said the discs told a story not of kings or gods, but of beings from the stars. According to his translation, the discs described a crash landing. A spaceship had fallen from the sky 12,000 years ago. The beings aboard were small, pale-skinned, large-headed. They came in peace, but they were feared. The local tribes hunted them, mistrusted them, and the visitors died here far from their home. One passage reportedly read, "The Dropa came down from the clouds. Their craft crashed. They asked to live with us in peace. But we did not understand. We thought they were invaders." The beings were called the Dropa, and the discs became known as the Dropa stones. But just as quickly as the story emerged, it began to fade. There was no official record of the 1938 expedition, no verified identity for Sum Nui. Some said he was Japanese. Others claimed he never existed. The museum in Xi'an where the stones were once displayed took them down. No official photos were published. No samples were made available. And eventually, the stones were gone. To mainstream science, the Dropa stones are a hoax. There is no peer-reviewed evidence. No material remains to study. No confirmation from Chinese authorities. Nothing that meets the standards of academic archaeology. But there are things that make the story harder to dismiss. Why invent such a specific number, 716 discs? Why describe such detailed features, holes, spirals, microscopic glyphs? Why build a narrative so deeply woven if it were just a rumor? And if the story is false, why not debunk it officially? In the late 1990s, German researcher Hartwig Hausdorff traveled to China to investigate. He published a book titled The Chinese Roswell. He claimed to have seen two of the discs in a small museum before they were removed. He reported that an unpublished study suggested the stones emitted a low-frequency hum, not enough to be heard, but enough to register on instruments. A vibration, a resonance, something that shouldn't be there. Still, the stones disappeared, and with them so did the truth. What remains is the gap, the silence, the mystery. Perhaps the Dropa stones were real. Perhaps they never existed. But the story persists because of something deeper, because it taps into a question we can't seem to shake. What if we are not the first to look up at the stars, and not the only ones to come down from them? Around the world, similar tales emerge. Carvings of beings with elongated skulls, depictions of flying discs on temple walls, legends of sky people, star ancestors, visitors from beyond, and always the same pattern: discovery, controversy, disappearance. Some say it's myth, others say it's memory. Science demands evidence. But what if the evidence was erased? What if just once a spaceship really did fall? What if the Dropa really came here and never left? What if they died in those caves and the stones were all they had to speak through time? We may never find the discs again, but the story remains, etched not in stone, but in us, in our need to know, to remember, to wonder. And sometimes, that's all it takes to keep a mystery alive. In the mist-covered highlands of Hubei province, where dense forests swallow the sound of wind, there is a place few have heard of. A quiet mountain, a forgotten cave, and a story that refuses to die, not because it is proven, but because it cannot be erased. It began, like many great mysteries do, not in a lab but in rumor, a whispered account from a group of miners or surveyors, men sent into the wilderness for work, men who came back different. According to scattered online forums and anonymous reports from the early 2000s, a massive human-like skeleton was uncovered during an excavation near Mufu Mountain. Not a few bones, a full skeleton, complete, and impossibly large. The skull alone was said to be 4 to 5 times the size of a normal human head. The femur bones measured over 2 meters long. Experts, if any were truly consulted, allegedly estimated the figure would have stood between 12 and 15 meters tall. A giant, but that's not what made the story terrifying. What made it terrifying was what happened next, or rather, what didn't. According to the accounts, a team arrived within days, not archaeologists, not university researchers, but a special unit, uniforms, vehicles, silence. The area was sealed off, photographs were confiscated, equipment was taken. Witnesses were allegedly forced to sign non-disclosure agreements or warned not to speak. And then nothing, no press release, no museum announcement, no journal article, no bones, just silence. As if it never happened. Skeptics call it nonsense. They say there's no evidence, no photographs, no fossils, no credible sources. But believers point to a pattern, a global pattern, because this isn't the first story like this, nor the only one. In 2004, an image circulated online showing a massive humanoid skeleton unearthed by soldiers in Saudi Arabia. It went viral. It was later debunked as a hoax, photoshopped using an elephant fossil dig. And yet millions believed it. Some still do. Go further back. Newspaper archives from the 19th and early 20th centuries. The New York Times, Scientific American, regional papers across the United States repeatedly reported the discovery of giant skeletons in burial mounds in Ohio, Wisconsin, California, and beyond. Each time the story followed the same script: discovery, shock, removal, disappearance. Many of these skeletons were allegedly sent to institutions like the Smithsonian, but to this day, no such artifacts are on display. Some researchers have even accused these institutions of actively suppressing evidence that challenges accepted evolutionary timelines. Too big, too inconvenient, too dangerous. Could it be the same with Mufu Mountain? If such a skeleton were real, what would it mean? It would shatter anthropology, disrupt history, force a reckoning with every assumption we hold about our species. So maybe it's easier not to know, or rather, to pretend not to know. And maybe Mufu isn't alone. Across the ancient world, giants appear again and again, not just in mythology, but in religious texts, cultural memory, and the architecture itself. The Nephilim in the Hebrew Bible, the Rakshasa in Indian epics, the Jotnar of Norse cosmology, the Titans of Greece, the Anakim of Canaan, the Patagonian giants seen by Magellan's crew. Even Aboriginal legends speak of enormous beings who shape the land itself. Are these just symbols, archetypes, exaggerations of reality, or are they distorted memories of something real, of a time when beings walked the earth who were not like us? Not entirely. Mainstream science offers no such possibility. It points to biological limits. The human skeleton cannot support the mass of a 12-meter body. The heart couldn't pump blood that far. The bones would break under their own weight. And yet, real anomalies do exist. Robert Wadlow, the tallest recorded human in modern history, stood 272 meters tall. His growth was caused by a rare condition, pituitary gland hyperplasia. His body adapted, barely, but it proved one thing. Gigantism is real. It happens. In Indonesia, fossilized remains called Meganthropus paleojavanicus suggest a large hominid, much larger than Homo sapiens. Its classification is still debated, but the size is not. Some theorists suggest that the legends of giants aren't pure fiction. They are collective memory, passed down, simplified, mythologized, but rooted in something that once walked among us. If so, then Mufu Mountain might not be an anomaly. It might be evidence of a branch of humanity that vanished or was erased. And if that's true, maybe the cover-ups aren't about hiding monsters. Maybe they're about hiding history. Because the moment we accept that such a being could have existed, everything changes, from evolution to religion to who we believe we are. That's why these stories stay, not because they're proven, but because they're never disproven. They remain suspended, like the bones that no one can find, and the cave that no one dares to dig again. Maybe the skeleton at Mufu was a hoax, or maybe it was. But sometimes, what keeps a mystery alive is not what we know, it's what no one is allowed to ask. In the deep south of China, hidden among the misty forests of Guizhou province, stands the forgotten city of Guilo. There are no crowds, no tourist buses, no souvenir shops, only silence and stone. The ruins of Guilo have stood for over 1,000 years, not because they were built to last, but because they were built with a secret, a kind of knowledge we no longer understand, a logic that defies modern explanation. The most astonishing feature of Guilo isn't its size, it isn't its design, it's what it lacks. There is no mortar, no cement, no binding agent of any kind. Each brick, each block of stone was carved with such precision that it locked perfectly into place with the next. A dry stack construction held together by geometry alone. And yet, it still stands. How? In 2003, an earthquake exceeding magnitude 6.0 struck near Guilo. Hundreds of modern buildings in surrounding towns suffered damage. Cracks appeared in reinforced concrete. Roofs collapsed. Homes were destroyed. But when engineers visited the ancient walls of Guilo, not a single major crack. The stones remained firm, unshaken, as if the ground itself had spared them. This shouldn't be possible. Modern buildings rely on steel reinforcements, concrete cores, and seismic design. Guilo has none of these. It was built centuries before such concepts existed, and yet it absorbs earthquakes better than many structures built today. Why? According to architectural teams from the Southwest University of Architecture, the answer may lie in what they call natural flexibility. The stones were carved with tiny ridges and grooves, each interlocked with just enough space to allow the walls to breathe, to shift slightly under pressure rather than resist it. Unlike concrete, which is hard but brittle, Guilo's stone structures are soft in spirit, rigid enough to stand, but gentle enough to bend. A concept that sounds more like Eastern philosophy than Western engineering. But perhaps that's the point. The walls also lean ever so slightly outward, not enough to see with the eye, but enough to redirect vertical force into the ground, rather than letting it pile up vertically like a modern wall. The geometry disperses pressure. The structure listens to the earth rather than fights it. That's not just engineering, that's awareness. And the materials. The stones were quarried locally, chosen not just for strength but for grain, elasticity, and balance. Some researchers believe the builders tested each stone by hand, using sound and vibration, the way instrument makers test wood. Not with numbers, with feel, with intuition. How did they know all this? There are no blueprints, no engineering manuals, no records of structural theory, only the walls and the silence that holds them. But Guilo wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. At the city gates stood wooden towers, multi-tiered and ornate. They served dual purpose: lookouts for approaching enemies and temples for celestial guardians. Every entrance was both a defense and a prayer. The city was not protected by walls alone. It was protected by belief. Military texts from the Ming and Qing dynasties describe similar cities. Cities where architecture and spirituality were inseparable, where angles reflected constellations, where walls were not barriers but symbols of cosmic order. And still Guilo stands. Today, locals tell strange stories. They say the walls are protected by the spirits of their ancestors, that at night when the earth trembles, the stones emit metallic sounds, like something ancient waking up. Science scoffs, but science cannot explain why the walls remain when everything else has fallen. There is no mortar, no steel, no concrete, only patience, precision, and knowledge that no one taught us. In 2019, a group of architecture students stood at Guilo's foundations. They wrote in their report, "Perhaps we need to learn more from the past than we thought." Because Guilo doesn't shout, it doesn't shine, it doesn't beg to be noticed, it just endures through rain, through war, through earthquakes, through time. And maybe that is the greatest mystery of all, not how it was built, but how it still stands, quietly, as if to remind us that the greatest strength is not always visible. Long before the first telescope, before the first written formula, before metal, mathematics, or even recorded language, there existed two diagrams, drawn not by hand but according to legend delivered by the rivers themselves. One emerged from the Yellow River, carried on the back of a mythical creature with the body of a horse and the scales of a dragon. The ancients called it the Longma. Upon its back appeared a series of black and white dots, arranged in a pattern that would come to be known as the He-Tu, the river map. The second rose from the Luo River, etched on the shell of a divine turtle. It too held a pattern, a grid of 9 numbers arranged in perfect balance. This became the Luo Shu, the Luo diagram. At first glance, they seem simple, dots, numbers, lines, but hidden within them is a cosmology so profound it still baffles modern science. The He-Tu, or river map, is composed of odd and even numbers. White dots represent yang, black dots represent yin. Each cluster corresponds to one of the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Each is placed with geometric precision aligned to cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, and center. But this isn't just symbolism. It's a code, a map of the universe in motion. It reflects seasonal cycles, planetary paths, the phases of life and death. Later philosophers would use this pattern to create the earlier Heaven Bagua, the original 8 trigrams of the I Ching, the Book of Changes, a tool not just for divination, but for understanding how the universe flows. If the He-Tu represents movement, then the Luo Shu represents balance. The Luo diagram is the world's oldest known magic square, a 3x3 grid with numbers 1 through 9. No matter how you add the rows, columns, or diagonals, the sum is always 15. Perfect symmetry, perfect harmony. Modern mathematicians still praise it as a numerical miracle. But to the ancients, it was more than a puzzle. It was the pattern of reality. Each number carried meaning: 1 for water, 2 for fire, 3 for wood, 4 for metal, 5 for earth, 9 for culmination. They weren't just abstract. They were alive. At the center of the grid is the number 5, representing humanity, the axis between heaven and earth. It's not by accident. It's philosophy embedded in numbers, a worldview encoded in mathematics. What baffles researchers today is not just what the diagrams say, but how they were created. These diagrams predate formal mathematics. They predate written Chinese. They predate structured philosophy. There are no drafts, no versions, no step-by-step evolution. They appear in history already complete, already functioning, as if they were received, not invented. Could this be coincidence? The West did not engage with magic squares until Pythagoras, and even then they were mostly mathematical curiosities. But in China, thousands of years earlier, they were already being used to build cities, to align tombs, to design calendars, to balance internal organs in traditional medicine. Yes, medicine. The 5 elements theory, which underpins Chinese medicine, feng shui, martial arts, and even music, all trace their origin to the He-Tu and Luo Shu. Your liver is wood, your heart is fire, your spleen is earth, your lungs are metal, your kidneys are water. Even time and direction correspond to numbers in the diagram. How could a civilization without computers or telescopes map the universe with such accuracy? How did they know the cyclical flow of energy, the subtle interplay of opposites, the code of nature itself? Some scholars suggest that generations of observation created the patterns. That wisdom was passed through ritual and story. But others believe something deeper, that these diagrams came not from deduction, but from intuition, from a form of consciousness no longer accessible to us, a way of seeing through feeling, through symbols, through connection, not calculation. In 2016, an article in Nature called the Luo diagram an anomaly without precedent, a structure that is logically perfect but historically impossible. It fits, but it shouldn't exist, and yet it does. So where did it come from? Who first saw these patterns in the rivers? Were they mystics, mathematicians, messengers, or were they something else entirely? Some suggest extraterrestrial contact. Others say ancient lost civilizations. Still others believe the diagrams are encoded memory, the last whispers of a time when humans and the cosmos were still in dialogue. Whatever the origin, one truth remains. The He Tu and Luo Shu are not just symbols. They are foundations, the DNA of Eastern thought, and perhaps a key to something we've forgotten. Because long before we had equations or satellites or telescopes, someone looked into the water and saw the structure of the stars. On the quiet plains of Shaanxi province, China, lies a place that almost disappeared from memory. It has no pyramids, no palaces, no monumental walls, just a ring of earth, a platform of dust, and 13 narrow openings carved into its outer rim. At first glance, it looks like nothing, the remnants of a collapsed structure, a circle of dirt long abandoned. But in 2003, everything changed, because sunlight began to speak. Archaeologists from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences were conducting excavations at the Neolithic site of Taosi, a settlement over 4,000 years old. What they found was not a palace, not a tomb, but a circular structure of rammed earth nearly 60 meters wide, with an arrangement of precisely spaced slots around its edge. And when the sun passed through them, everything made sense. During the summer and winter solstices, and on the equinoxes, sunlight shone directly through certain slots. Each beam hit the platform inside at a different angle. Each position matched a specific point on the horizon. This was no ceremonial circle. It was a solar observatory, one of the oldest ever discovered, and it was built without writing, without metal tools, without telescopes, just earth, sky, and an understanding of time that modern science still struggles to believe. How could Neolithic humans track the sun with such precision? How did they know where it would rise and fall at exact points in the year? And more importantly, why did they build this? Some researchers suggest the observatory served as a calendar, a way for farmers to mark the seasons, to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for flood or frost. But there is more, much more. Near the observatory, archaeologists uncovered sacrificial pits, human remains, animal bones, fragments of pottery, and a giant stone drum likely used during solar ceremonies. Nearby tombs revealed elite burials, individuals buried with ritual artifacts, possibly priest kings who held not just political power but cosmic authority. This was no simple farming tool. It was a spiritual machine, a place where leaders could stand and say, "I command the calendar." where the rising sun wasn't just light, but a sign from heaven. In traditional Chinese philosophy, the harmony between heaven Tian, earth Dai, and humanity Ren was everything. To rule justly, a leader had to align with the mandate of heaven Tiananmen. And that meant reading the skies, knowing the heavens, controlling time. So when the sun pierced the gates of Taosi on the morning of the solstice, it wasn't just light. It was legitimacy, it was order, it was divine permission to rule. But who built this? And how did they learn to track the sun with such accuracy? There are no written records from Taosi, no texts, no diagrams, only the earth, only the stones, only the shadows. Some suggest that generations of careful observation led to this achievement, a sacred science passed orally, a knowledge system built from rhythm, ritual, and memory. Others believe the structure was inherited, that it was built by a culture that had already begun to vanish. A remnant, not a beginning. In any case, what makes Taosi so strange is how advanced it was and how early. This observatory dates back to 2300 BCE, earlier than Babylonian star charts, earlier than Stonehenge, earlier than Greek planetary models, and yet it is almost unknown. Why? Maybe because it doesn't fit the story we've been told. That science began in Mesopotamia. That astronomy was born in Egypt or Greece. That only the West sought to measure the heavens. But Taosi changes that. It reminds us that ancient China didn't just observe the sky, it built with it, aligned stone with sunlight, aligned society with stars, and then it disappeared. Why was the observatory abandoned? Why were no similar structures found nearby? Why did the knowledge vanish? We don't know. Maybe the people of Taosi were overthrown, maybe a drought, a war, a shift in power, or maybe, just maybe, the light they followed moved on, and the meaning was lost with it. What remains is a circle of earth, a ring of silence, and a question. What if our ancestors understood the cosmos not through equations, but through experience, not through control, but through connection? And what if that knowledge still echoes, quietly, every time the sun rises between the stones? Perhaps the greatest mysteries aren't buried in the ground, but in the silence we choose to leave undisturbed.